The billionaire couple laughed as they fired their maid, actually laughed, planning to frame her for theft while discussing it in Russian right in front of her. Robert Brennan turned to his wife and said in Mandarin, "After the Moscow transfer tomorrow, we disappear with 500 million. The stupid maid goes to federal prison for stealing jewelry." They clinked champagne glasses, celebrating their brilliance. That's when Maria Santos did something that made their champagne turn to poison in their mouths. She responded in perfect Russian, then Mandarin, then Arabic, listing every crime they'd committed, every account number they'd mentioned, every corrupt judge they'd bribed. The Mexican maid they'd mocked for 3 years was FBI's Special Agent Santos, and she'd just transmitted their confession to 17 federal agencies simultaneously. The pink slip trembled in Maria Santos's weathered hands as she stood in the marble foyer of the Brennan mansion, her modest black uniform still damp from scrubbing their Italian marble floors one last time. "You're fired for breach of trust," Catherine Brennan announced, her diamond earrings catching the morning light streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows as she held up her iPhone displaying a security camera screenshot. "We have you on video, lingering outside Robert's office during confidential calls, pressing your ear against doors, pretending to dust the same vase for 20 minutes while we discussed private matters." But Maria didn't defend herself, didn't plead for the job she'd held for 3 years, she simply pulled out her own phone, dialed a number, and spoke 5 words that would destroy the Brennan empire forever: "They know. Move in now." Within seconds, the circular driveway filled with black SUVs, their doors opening in synchronized precision as FBI agents in tactical gear surrounded the $10 million estate. Robert Brennan, who'd been smirking from his position by the grandfather clock, watched the color drain from his wife's face as Agent Sarah Chen entered through the front door they'd just opened to throw out their maid. "Mr. and Mrs. Brennan, you're under arrest for money laundering, tax evasion, and conspiracy to commit wire fraud. You have the right to remain silent." As the handcuffs clicked around Catherine's wrists, her Cartier watch catching against the metal, she turned to Maria with dawning horror. "You're not really a maid." Maria pulled out her federal badge, the one she'd hidden beneath 3 years of submission and silence, 3 years of, "Yes, Mrs. Brennan," and, right away, "Mr. Brennan," 3 years of translating their Russian, Mandarin, and Arabic conversations they thought their Mexican maid couldn't possibly understand. "Special Agent Maria Santos, FBI Financial Crimes Division. And every word you spoke in front of me, every crime you planned while I cleaned your blood money, has been documented, translated, and filed as evidence. If you're watching this unfold on Acts of Depth, you know we believe that justice often comes from the most unexpected places, that those who serve in silence sometimes carry the weight of righteousness, and that underestimating someone based on their position might be the last mistake you ever make. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because what led to this moment will restore your faith in the power of patient justice. Maria's journey to the Brennan mansion had begun not in an employment agency but in a federal building in Washington, D.C., where her gift for languages had caught the attention of recruiters who saw potential beyond her immigrant story. Born in Juarez, Mexico, she'd crossed the border at 15 with nothing but determination and a mind that absorbed languages like desert sand absorbs rain. By 20, she spoke 7 languages fluently, not from expensive schools but from working in restaurants where international conversations flowed with wine, from libraries where she devoured grammar books, from the necessity of survival in a world that demanded adaptation. The FBI had recruited her at 28, not for her degree from Harvard, she didn't have one, but for her ability to blend into backgrounds while processing multiple conversations simultaneously. She could wash dishes while translating Russian mob conversations, could vacuum carpets while memorizing Arabic financial codes, could serve drinks while cataloging Mandarin business terminology. Her superiors called her the ghost, present but invisible, essential but unnoticed, the perfect operative for long-term infiltration. The Brennan case had been building for 5 years before Maria arrived. Robert Brennan, hedge fund king with connections spanning from Wall Street to Moscow, had been laundering money through a network so complex that traditional surveillance had failed. His wife Catherine, former State Department translator turned society hostess, provided the international connections that made their operation seamless. They spoke in code-switched languages, believing their polyglot conversations were shields against law enforcement. They needed someone who could be in their home, invisible and trusted, someone they'd never suspect could understand their multilingual conspiracy. Maria had prepared for 6 months before applying for the job. She studied Mexican regional accents to perfect her cover, learned to suppress her knowledge behind carefully constructed broken English, practiced the posture of someone who'd cleaned houses since childhood. When she'd stood at their door for the interview, she was no longer Federal Agent Santos but Maria the maid, widow with 2 children, desperate for work, grateful for any opportunity. Catherine had hired her immediately, delighted to find someone who worked for less than minimum wage, who never complained about 16-hour days, who seemed too simple to understand anything beyond basic cleaning instructions. "She's perfect," Catherine had told Robert that first day, speaking in French while Maria cleaned within earshot. Docile, desperate, and too stupid to cause problems. For 3 years, Maria had perfected the art of invisible visibility, present in every room but noticed by no one, her hands moving through familiar motions of service while her mind catalogued crimes that would eventually fill 17 federal indictments. She arrived each morning at 6, entering through the service entrance, hanging her coat in the small closet that smelled of cleaning supplies and broken dreams, or so the Brennans assumed. In reality, that closet contained a sophisticated recording device sewn into the lining of her spare uniform, transmitting everything to a van parked 3 blocks away where Agent Chen monitored every word. The Brennans' arrogance had been their downfall, their assumption that the brown woman scrubbing their toilets couldn't possibly understand their sophisticated schemes. They would switch languages mid-sentence, a habit from Catherine's State Department days, believing it was clever tradecraft. Russian when discussing the offshore accounts, Mandarin for the Hong Kong connections, Arabic for the Middle Eastern investors they were defrauding, French for their affairs, German for the Swiss banks, and English only for the mundane details they didn't mind the help overhearing. Maria remembered the morning everything shifted from suspicion to certainty. She'd been cleaning Robert's office, carefully dusting the photographs of him with senators and CEOs, when he'd entered with Vladimir Petrov, a man whose name appeared on every federal watch list. They'd spoken entirely in Russian, confident their maid was focused on making his mahogany desk shine. "The prosecutor thinks he has enough to indict," Petrov had said, "but he doesn't know about the judge. 20 million should be enough to make this disappear." Robert had laughed, responding, "Make it 30. I want him to stay bought." She'd continued polishing, her movements steady despite the adrenaline surge of documenting judicial corruption at the highest level. That evening, her report had set off alarms throughout the Justice Department. The case was no longer just about financial crimes, it was about the systematic corruption of the American legal system. But they needed more, needed names, account numbers, the full network. Maria had to go deeper, had to become even more invisible, had to endure more degradation for the sake of justice. Catherine had been the crueler of the two, her treatment of Maria a study in casual dehumanization. She would leave notes in English with deliberately complex vocabulary, then berate Maria for not understanding. She would spill wine on carpets deliberately, watching Maria scrub on her knees while discussing million-dollar transfers in languages she believed were safe. Once, hosting a dinner party for international clients, Catherine had actually used Maria as an example of why America needs stricter immigration laws, all while Maria served canapés and memorized the names of every criminal at the table. The irony was that Maria held a master's degree in linguistics from Universidad Nacional Autónoma de Mexico, had published papers on code switching in multilingual criminal organizations, had been recruited by the FBI specifically because her doctoral thesis had cracked a cartel communication system. But here she stood, accepting Catherine's abuse with downcast eyes and mumbled apologies, each insult another piece of evidence, each humiliation another step toward justice. Robert was different but no less criminal, his sexism so ingrained he literally couldn't conceive of Maria as sentient. He would conduct entire criminal conspiracies via video call in his office while she cleaned, never once worrying that she might understand or remember. He'd even had her serve drinks during a meeting where they'd planned to launder $40 million through a children's charity. The beauty of using pediatric cancer, he'd said in Mandarin to his Chinese associates, is that no one wants to investigate sick kids. Maria had nearly broken cover that day, her hand tightening on the crystal decanter as she poured whiskey for men planning to steal from dying children. But she'd maintained her facade, had even smiled when Robert patronizingly pressed a $5 tip into her hand, telling his associates in Mandarin, "You have to treat them well or they complain to their priest." The associates had laughed, and Maria had memorized each face, each name, each tell that would eventually put them in federal prison. The evidence had mounted week by week, month by month, year by year. Swiss account numbers written on napkins she'd retrieved from trash bins. Phone numbers of corrupt officials left on post-it notes she'd carefully photographed. Passwords spoken aloud in Russian because Robert couldn't remember them and thought his maid was too ignorant to retain random numbers. Maria had gathered it all, a patient spider weaving a web that would eventually ensnare an entire network of white-collar criminals who believed their wealth and languages made them untouchable. The breaking point came on a Thursday morning that had started like any other, with Maria arriving to find Catherine passed out on the couch, empty wine bottles testament to another night of excess. But on the coffee table, forgotten in Catherine's intoxicated state, lay documents that made Maria's blood freeze, incorporation papers for a new charity called Angels of Tomorrow, specifically designed to funnel money from legitimate donors into the Brennans' criminal enterprise. The twist that made Maria's stomach turn: they were planning to use real sick children as props, partnering with a legitimate hospital to provide just enough actual charity to maintain cover while stealing 90% of donations. Maria photographed every page with the microcamera hidden in her cleaning supply caddy, her hand steady despite the rage building in her chest. These weren't just numbers on a spreadsheet anymore, these were real children who would be denied treatment so the Brennans could buy another yacht, another mansion, another piece of art to display at parties where they'd mock the bleeding hearts who donated to their cause. As she worked, Robert entered the room on a call, speaking in Arabic to someone he addressed as Minister. Maria continued cleaning, but her trained ear caught every word. "The FBI investigation is stalled. Our friend in the department says they have nothing actionable. We can proceed with the Moscow transfer next week." He switched to Russian. "Tell Dmitry the prosecutor has been handled. The indictment will be dropped by Monday." This was it, the confirmation of the mole inside the FBI that the agency had suspected but couldn't identify. Maria's handler had warned her someone was leaking information, but they hadn't known how high the corruption went. As Robert continued his call, switching between languages with the confidence of someone who believed himself untouchable, he unknowingly provided the roadmap to unraveling not just his empire but a corruption network that reached into the Justice Department itself. That afternoon, Catherine had friends over for lunch, a gathering of trophy wives who competed through their husbands' wealth while pretending at friendship. Maria served their salads and wine, invisible as always, while the women discussed their plans for the new charity. "The beautiful thing," Catherine explained in French to her Swiss friend, "is that people are so emotional about sick children. They never ask for detailed accounting. We'll show them photos of bald babies, and they'll throw money at us." One of the women, younger and newer to the group, seemed uncomfortable. "But won't the children actually need help?" she asked in accented English. Catherine had laughed, switching to German. "That's what makes it perfect. We'll help just enough to seem legitimate. A few treatments here and there, some photo opportunities. The rest." She made a gesture of money flying away, and the women laughed, except for the young one who looked sick. Maria had wanted to poison their wine, to scream the truth, to tear off her uniform and reveal her badge right then. Instead, she'd refreshed their glasses and memorized every detail. The Swiss woman was Greta Hoffmann, wife of a banker involved in the laundering. The older redhead was Patricia Chen, whose husband ran the Hong Kong connection. The uncomfortable young one was Natalie Volkov, married to Dmitry, the Russian contact Robert had mentioned. Each woman at that table was complicit, each laugh another piece of evidence, each casual cruelty another nail in their golden coffins. That evening, as Maria cleaned up after dinner, she'd overheard the conversation that would accelerate everything. Robert was in his study with someone she'd never seen before, a tall man with silver hair and the bearing of someone used to power. They spoke in hushed English, but Maria could hear from her position in the hallway. "The maid concerns me," the silver-haired man said. She's been here too long. She knows the house too well. Robert had laughed. Maria? She's harmless. Barely speaks English, probably illegal. Even if she understood anything, who would believe her? Still, the man persisted, with the FBI sniffing around, we should be careful. Maybe it's time to let her go. After the Moscow transfer, Robert agreed. We'll fire her next Friday. Make up some reason. Maybe plant some jewelry in her bag, claim she stole it. That way, if she tries to talk, she'll have a theft charge hanging over her. Maria's hand had tightened on her mop handle. They were planning to frame her, to destroy her invented identity just as they'd destroyed so many real lives. But they'd also given her a timeline. The Moscow transfer was the key, the final piece of evidence that would bring everything crashing down. She had 1 week to gather the last crucial details before they tried to discard her like the trash they believed her to be. Maria spent the next 6 days in hypervigilance, aware that every moment could be her last in the house, every conversation potentially the final piece of evidence needed to destroy the Brennan empire. She arrived earlier, stayed later, pushed her cover story to its limits by being the perfect, invisible servant while her real work accelerated. The FBI had moved surveillance teams into position, ready to strike the moment the Moscow transfer was confirmed, but they needed the account numbers, the exact amount, the full list of recipients. On Tuesday, she'd gotten lucky. Catherine, stressed about the impending transfer, had been drinking heavily and speaking carelessly on the phone in Mandarin to their Hong Kong associates. 500 million, she'd said, split between 17 accounts. Robert has the numbers in his safe. Then, in a moment of drunken frustration with technology, she'd shouted the safe combination as she struggled to open it, 479168. Why can't I remember these simple things? Maria had been mopping the hallway, the rhythmic sound of her work covering the tiny click of her recorder capturing every word. That night, her report to Agent Chen had sent shockwaves through the investigation. 500 million was more than they'd imagined, and 17 accounts meant 17 different criminal entities they could prosecute. But they still needed those account numbers, and the safe was in Robert's study where cameras monitored every angle. Wednesday brought an unexpected complication. Natalie Volkov, the young wife who'd seemed uncomfortable at the luncheon, had approached Maria while she was cleaning the guest bathroom. You understand more than you show, don't you? She'd whispered in accented English, her eyes fearful but determined. Maria had maintained her cover, responding in broken English, no understand, Mrs. Volkov. I clean only. But Natalie had persisted, switching to Russian, I know you understand. I've watched you. Your eyes change when we speak different languages. You're not who you pretend to be. Then, surprisingly, she'd added, neither am I. I want out. My husband beats me. I have recordings of his conversations. Help me, and I'll help you. It was a moment that could have blown everything, but Maria had seen the bruises Natalie had tried to cover with makeup, had heard the fear in her voice. She'd made a decision that her handlers would later call reckless but inspired. Still in broken English, she'd said, you leave Thursday night. Pack light. Someone will help. Thursday arrived with tension thick as morning fog. Robert was edgy, pacing his office, making calls in rapid-fire Russian, German, and Arabic. The Moscow transfer was set for Friday morning, and something was making him nervous. The silver-haired man visited again, and this time Maria recognized him from FBI files, Judge William Thornton, the corrupt official they'd been trying to identify for 2 years. The FBI investigation needs to end permanently, Thornton said in Robert's study, not bothering to lower his voice since only the stupid maid was within earshot. I've protected you as long as I can, but there are limits. After tomorrow's transfer, you need to disappear for a while. I've arranged new identities for you and Catherine. You'll leave Saturday morning. And the maid? Robert asked. Frame her tomorrow when you fire her. I'll ensure she's arrested immediately. An illegal immigrant with a theft charge won't be credible if she tries to talk. Maria had continued dusting, her movements mechanical while her mind raced. They were planning to run, to escape with $500 million and new identities. The FBI had to move tomorrow, had to catch them with the evidence before they disappeared forever. But she still needed those account numbers. That evening, opportunity presented itself in the form of Catherine's weekly yoga class. She left at 7, giving Maria a 2-hour window. Robert was in his office on a conference call with Moscow, distracted and speaking entirely in Russian about the technical details of the transfer. Maria entered his study with her cleaning supplies, moving with practiced efficiency toward the bookshelf that concealed the safe. Robert glanced at her but continued his call, switching to German to discuss the Swiss accounts that would receive the funds. Maria pulled out her dusting cloth, working her way methodically toward the safe. Her heart pounded as she entered the combination Catherine had shouted days ago, 4-7-9-1-6-8. The safe opened silently, revealing stacks of documents, cash in multiple currencies, and a single red folder marked Moscow. With Robert's back turned as he faced the window during his call, Maria photographed every page in the folder. Account numbers, routing codes, names of beneficiaries including 3 senators, 2 judges, and a deputy director at the FBI itself. The corruption was deeper than anyone had imagined, a cancer that had metastasized throughout the justice system. She closed the safe, continued dusting, and left the room as invisibly as she'd entered. That night, Maria's final report didn't go to Agent Chen alone. It went directly to the Attorney General, bypassing the potentially compromised chain of command. Within hours, a joint task force was assembled, arrest warrants were signed by judges whose integrity had been verified, and plans were made for simultaneous raids across 12 states and 3 countries. Friday morning arrived with Maria knowing it would be her last day as a maid, one way or another. She entered the Brennan mansion for the final time, her uniform hiding the wire she wore to capture their last words as free people. Catherine was in the kitchen, on the phone with her Swiss banker, confirming the accounts were ready to receive the transfers. Robert was in his study, laptop open, preparing to move $500 million with a few keystrokes. At precisely 9:47 a.m., Robert initiated the Moscow transfer, his fingers moving across the keyboard with the confidence of someone who'd moved dirty money 1,000 times before. Maria stood in the hallway, ostensibly polishing a mirror, actually confirming via her wire that the transfer was in progress. $500 million began flowing through digital channels, flagged and tracked by FBI cybercrime units who'd been waiting 3 years for this moment. Each transaction was recorded, each destination mapped, creating an undeniable trail of criminal conspiracy that would be impossible to explain away in court. Catherine entered Robert's study with champagne, speaking in French, "To our last day in this prison of a country. By tomorrow, we'll be in Switzerland under new names, and that stupid maid will be in federal detention." They clinked glasses, laughing at their own cleverness, unaware that Maria stood just outside, her phone sending a simple text to Agent Chen, "Transfer complete. All units go." At 10:15 a.m., Catherine called Maria into the living room where Robert waited with the planted evidence, a pair of diamond earrings Catherine had reported missing a week ago, ready to be discovered in Maria's bag. "Maria," Catherine said with false sweetness, "we need to discuss something troubling." But before she could continue her rehearsed accusation, Maria did something that shattered their world. She straightened her posture, looked them directly in the eyes, and spoke in perfect, unaccented English. "Before you continue, Mr. and Mrs. Brennan, you should know that the Moscow transfer you just completed has been tracked by the FBI, the $500 million you moved is frozen in transit, and Judge Thornton was arrested at his home 20 minutes ago." The champagne glass slipped from Catherine's hand, shattering on the Italian marble she'd been so proud of. Robert lunged for his laptop, trying to reverse the transfer, but Maria continued calmly, "Your passwords were changed remotely 5 minutes ago. Your accounts are frozen. Dmitry Volkov was arrested in Moscow an hour ago, and his wife Natalie is in witness protection, providing testimony about your entire operation." "You're not a maid," Robert said, his face cycling through confusion, rage, and fear. "I'm exactly what I've always been," Maria replied, pulling out her badge. "Someone who serves justice. The difference is, you were too arrogant to see that service comes in many forms. For 3 years, I've cleaned your house while documenting your crimes. I've listened to you mock immigrants while being one myself. I've endured your racism, your classism, your casual cruelty, all while building a case that will put you away for life." The sound of vehicles on gravel announced the FBI's arrival. Through the windows, black SUVs surrounded the property. Agents in tactical gear took positions at every exit. The doorbell rang with almost comical normality, and Maria walked to answer it, her sensible maid's shoes clicking on the marble one last time. Agent Chin entered with a full tactical team, but Maria held up a hand. "They're in the living room. They're not going anywhere." She turned back to the Brennans, who stood frozen like deer in headlights. "You asked me once, Catherine, why I worked so hard for so little money. The answer is simple: I wasn't working for you. I was working for every person you've stolen from, every charity you've corrupted, every life you've destroyed with your greed." As the agents moved in with handcuffs, Robert tried one last desperate plea: "We have money. We can pay. Millions. Just let us go." Maria shook her head. "That's what you never understood. Not everything is for sale. Not everyone can be bought. Some of us believe in something greater than money, we believe in justice." The arrest was swift and professional. Catherine cried as the handcuffs clicked around her wrists, her designer dress incongruous with the federal custody she was entering. Robert maintained his arrogance until the end, demanding his lawyer, threatening lawsuits, unable to accept that his empire had been brought down by someone he'd considered less than human. As they were led out, Maria noticed something that gave her deep satisfaction. The neighbors had gathered, the same people who'd attended the Brennans' lavish parties, who'd laughed at their jokes about the help, who'd participated in their casual bigotry. They watched in shock as their hosts were perp-walked to federal vehicles, their world of privilege and prejudice cracking at the foundations. Agent Chin approached Maria as the house was sealed as a crime scene. 3 years, she said with admiration. "I don't know how you maintained cover for 3 years." Maria removed her maid's uniform jacket, revealing the professional attire underneath. She'd worn it every day, a reminder of who she really was beneath the role she played. Every insult was evidence. Every moment of disrespect was motivation. Every time they spoke their crimes in front of me, believing I was too stupid to understand, they gave me more power. 6 months later, at the trial that would become known as the most significant financial crimes prosecution of the decade, Maria testified for 3 days. She spoke in all 7 languages she'd used to document their crimes, translating conversations that the Brennans had believed were private. The jury, composed of people from all walks of life, listened as she detailed not just the financial crimes but the human cost, the charities defrauded, the children denied medical care, the families destroyed by the Brennans' greed. When the verdict came down, guilty on all 247 counts, Maria was in the gallery. The Brennans were sentenced to 45 years each, their assets seized and redistributed to their victims. Judge Thornton received 30 years. The corrupt FBI official got 25. In total, 17 people went to federal prison based on evidence Maria had gathered while they treated her as invisible. The last image that would stay with everyone who followed the case was Maria Santos on the courthouse steps, no longer in a maid's uniform but in the suit of a federal agent, speaking to reporters in multiple languages about the importance of never underestimating anyone based on their appearance or position. "I spent 3 years being invisible," she said, "but invisibility can be a superpower when you're fighting for justice." Behind her, the Brennan mansion was being converted into a shelter for victims of financial crimes, a place where those who'd lost everything to white-collar criminals could rebuild their lives. It seemed fitting, a house built on crime becoming a home for healing, spaces that had hosted criminal conspiracies now sheltering those seeking justice. Maria returned to active duty, but her legend within the FBI was secured. New agents studied her case, learning that the best operatives aren't always those with the most impressive credentials or the most sophisticated technology. Sometimes they're the ones willing to endure humiliation for the sake of justice, to be invisible in order to see everything, to serve in silence while gathering the truth that would eventually speak louder than any words. The Brennans, from their separate federal cells, would have decades to contemplate how their empire fell. Not through sophisticated FBI surveillance or complex financial investigation, but through their own arrogance in believing that the woman who cleaned their house was beneath consideration. They'd spoken their crimes freely, trusted their prejudices completely, and in doing so, had handed Maria Santos everything she needed to destroy them. Justice, Maria had learned, doesn't always announce itself with sirens and badges. Sometimes it arrives quietly, in sensible shoes and a uniform, carrying a mop in one hand and the weight of righteousness in the other. Sometimes the person you treat as invisible is the one who sees everything. And sometimes, just sometimes, the maid you fire for eavesdropping is actually the federal agent who's been translating your confession for 3 patient years, waiting for the perfect moment to reveal that in America, justice can come from anyone, regardless of what uniform they wear while serving it.